Nachman's stories are like that, crammed full of Kabbalistic wisdom, like gallons of medicine. He also said, most stories put you to sleep. Most lecturers also put you to sleep. But mine, he said, are told to wake you up. He told his tales to wake people up because they were asleep. He meant they were out of touch with their feelings and their souls. 100 years after they were told, Nachman's stories reached the soul of Franz Kafka, even though he was a highly assimilated Jew, through the translations by Martin Buber. Buber's program was, in fact, to create a different kind of Zionism. He wanted to create spiritually awakened people. He didn't think there was any point in resettling the land unless the people who resettled had their souls. Kafka fell in love with Hasidic parables. Writing in 1917 to Max Brod, he thanked his friend for sending him new translations of the Maggid of Mezrich, the storyteller of Mezrich who told so many parables. He wrote, "They may not be of the best, but for some reason I don't understand, all these stories are the only Jewish literature in which I immediately and always feel at home." To feel at home in anything, especially anything Jewish, was no small feat for a personality as homeless as Franz Kafka. His father, Hermann, who owned a fancy goods store in Prague, selling parasols and fancy gloves, had followed the standard strategy for Jewish secular survival at the end of the 19th century. Be a man in the street and a Jew at home. Be a man in the street and a Jew at home. That's the bifurcation. That's the passing that Jews were doing in Europe at that time. Now, Kafka's writing has the exact same quality. To outward appearances, it's a man in the street. His stories have no references to Jewish characters, to synagogues, to yarmulkes, to gefilte fish. There are no bar mitzvahs in Kafka's stories. In fact, there are whole schools of interpretation that see nothing Jewish in Kafka and view him as a completely nihilistic, atheistic, modernist writer, certainly not a Jewish writer. Yet, I'd like to suggest that's part of his genius, to do a kind of code switching. You understand code switching when people speak more than one language, when they might have the language of their own ethnic group, and then they can also speak the language of the outer world and switch back and forth. But Kafka was the ultimate genius of code switching because he created works that were simultaneously profoundly Gentile, profoundly secular, and incredibly Jewish. The very same works. This is a fairly remarkable feat. This is an extraordinary thing. But it left him personally very much up in the air. That's how he described himself. He responded to a review of the Metamorphosis when it was published. One critic said that it was the most essentially German work that had ever been published. Another critic said it was the most essentially Jewish work that had ever been published. Kafka wrote in dismay to his fiancée. He said, "I feel like a circus rider balanced on two horses, and I know I'm going to end up prostrate on the ground." One thing that connects Kafka and Nachman is their love of the Hasidic parable and the fact that they each reinvented it. Kafka is called the modern master of the parable. He took the parable out of the Jewish context and turned it out into the secular world. Rabbi Nachman did something different. He expanded the parable, as I said, and stuffed other parables within it. One parable they both might have heard about was the Maggid of Mezrich's tale, The King's Two Messengers. The king sends an angry soldier to summon a person. Now, in Jewish parables, I should add, the king is always, you know who. Always. King is always God. So the king sends an angry soldier to summon a person. The fool is totally terrified by the soldier's angry display. The wise man sees past it to the fear and awe of the king. So the wise one hurries to the king. Another time, the king sends a really friendly messenger who's joking and having fun. The fool hangs out with the messenger. The wise man once more goes directly to the king. In Jewish literature, every parable has a mashal, a story, a nimshal, an explanation. In the nimshal, the explanation, the Maggid says, messengers represent feelings. If we feel joy, a wise person takes that joy to the deepest level and goes to the king. If we feel terror, the wise person follows that feeling of terror and fear and goes to the king. But not the fool. The fool indulges himself with feelings. If they're good feelings, he holds on to them. If they're bad feelings, he flees them. Hasidic depth psychology derives from an entirely spiritual viewpoint. All feelings that we have their roots, their deepest roots, in God. Our own psychology has moved in the opposite direction. We don't see souls on their way to God. We just see brains on the way to the pharmacy. When we have difficult feelings, bad feelings, we try to alleviate them, get rid of them, medicate them, or get someone to explain them away. Sometimes that's truly necessary. But if we always do that with our feelings, we'll never know what our pain is about or what the message of the messenger is. Because the theme of hard times, I want to talk about bad feelings, especially the very difficult place people reach. A very particular place, maybe not everyone in this room has reached. A place of total despair. A place Kafka knew very well. The place of absence. The place of nothing. Perhaps our failure to deal with nothing is what gives rise to nihilism, a belief that says there are no depths and there is no king. Kafka expressed this feeling better than anyone, and most famously in his parable that's called The Man from the Country. When he wrote it, he knew it was in the form of a Hasidic parable, and he later inserts it in the next to last chapter of The Trial, where, as is typical of Kafka in a very Jewish story, Joseph K., a Catholic, and a priest debate in a cathedral the meaning of this Hasidic parable. You can see, readers will argue. They'll say, how can you say he's a Jewish writer? He's got a Catholic character in the Catholic Church arguing with a priest. It's true. And if you read it that way, gesund hey, you say, enjoy, it's okay. And it works. But if you read it from this other perspective, then it becomes a very different story. Let me tell you the parable if you don't know it. Before the law stands a doorkeeper. A man from the country comes to this doorkeeper and requests admittance to the law. But the doorkeeper says he can't grant him admittance now. The man thinks it over and then asks if he'll be allowed to enter later. It's possible, says the doorkeeper, but not now. Since the gate to the law stands open as always, and the doorkeeper steps aside, the man bends down to look through the gate into the interior. When the doorkeeper sees this, he laughs and says, if you're so drawn to it, go ahead, try to enter, even though I've forbidden it. From hall to hall, however, stand doorkeepers, each more powerful than the one before. The mere sight of the third is more than I can bear. The poor man from the country doesn't know what to do. He tries bribery, pleading, curses his bad luck, grows old and childish, all the time waiting for admission. Finally, his eyes grow dim. He doesn't know whether it's really getting darker around him, or if his eyes are really deceiving him. And yet in the darkness, he now sees a radiance that streams forth inextinguishably from the door of the wall. He doesn't have much longer to live now. Before he dies, everything he's experienced over the years coalesces in his mind into a single question. He's never asked the doorkeeper. He motions to him since he can no longer straighten his stiffening body. The doorkeeper has to bend down to him, for the difference in size between him has altered greatly to the man's disadvantage. "What do you want to know now?" asked the doorkeeper. "You're insatiable." "Everyone strives to reach the law," says the man. "How does it happen then, that in all these many years, no one but me has requested admittance?"